On September 23, 2010, a Chinese fishing trawler collided with two Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the Senkaku Islands. Japan arrested the captain. China's response wasn't diplomatic protest. It was embargo. Within 72 hours, rare earth element shipments to Japan ceased. Completely. No announcements, no formal declarations. Just silence at the ports where containers of neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium should have arrived. The announcement barely made headlines in Western newspapers. A territorial dispute in the East China Sea, boring geopolitics. But in boardrooms across 3 continents, a different reaction took hold. Alarm. Because those elements, with names most people can't pronounce, are inside everything. The permanent magnets in wind turbines, the batteries in electric vehicles, the guidance systems in Javelin missiles, the screens you're watching this on. And 90% of the world's supply comes from one country. Here's the problem. The world built a green energy revolution, a technology economy, and a military-industrial complex on top of the most concentrated supply chain in modern history. More concentrated than oil ever was, more fragile than semiconductors. China doesn't just mine rare earths, it refines them, it processes them, it manufactures the magnets. When Beijing wants to apply pressure, it has a choke point that makes OPEC look diversified. Rare earths aren't actually rare. They exist in deposits across every continent. What makes them rare isn't geology, it's economics and politics. Let me show you how this plays out. A mining company discovers a rare earth deposit in California. The ore is there. The machinery exists. But here's where it gets complicated. Rare earth elements don't come out of the ground ready to use. Separating them requires a chemical process so complex, so toxic, and so expensive that most countries decided decades ago it wasn't worth it. 1 ton of rare earth oxide requires processing 200 tons of ore and produces 2,000 tons of toxic waste. China made a different calculation. In the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping reportedly said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." China absorbed the environmental cost, subsidized the infrastructure, and ran operations at a loss for 2 decades to drive everyone else out of the market. By 2010, China controlled 97% of global rare earth production. Not because Chinese deposits were superior, because Chinese policy was strategic. Mountain Pass in California closed in 2002. Australia's Lynas almost went bankrupt twice. Every other country's rare earth operations shut down, sold for scrap, or merged into Chinese joint ventures. The pattern repeats: a strategic material, a supply chain that concentrates until one day you realize there's no alternative. Neodymium for wind turbines and EVs, 90% Chinese production. Dysprosium for military systems, 95% Chinese production. Terbium for precision guidance, 92% Chinese production. But the monopoly goes deeper than mining. Even if you found a rare earth deposit outside China tomorrow, you still face the refining problem. There are only 3 significant rare earth refining facilities outside China. 3 for the entire non-Chinese world. Meanwhile, China operates 137 rare earth refining facilities. If Chinese supply disappeared tomorrow, the rest of the world could replace 8% of the supply within 6 months. Another 12% within 2 years if every project succeeds. That leaves 80% of global demand with no source. Not expensive source, no source. General Motors needs neodymium magnets for every Chevy Bolt. Tesla needs them for Model 3s. Siemens needs them for wind turbines. Lockheed Martin needs them for F-35s. And they all have the same ultimate supplier. 4 Chinese companies control the processing. 1 country, 4 companies. The entire bottleneck. A manufacturer in Germany wants to build wind turbines. Each requires 600 kilograms of neodymium. The company orders magnets from Japan. Japan orders refined neodymium from China. But that Japanese supplier maintains exactly 60 days of inventory. When supply from China stops, for any reason, the German manufacturer has 2 months before their production line stops. Now multiply that across every industry. Ford plans 2 million EVs annually by 2026. Each requires 1 kilogram of neodymium. That's 2,000 metric tons per year. Where does it come from? Through a supply chain that traces back to Chinese processing. The US military is no different. Every F-35 contains 417 kilograms of rare earth elements. The Pentagon plans to build 2,456 F-35s, all dependent on a supply chain where China sits at the choke point. A Pentagon official admitted in 2021, "We can't build an F-35 without Chinese rare earths. The most advanced stealth fighter in American military history cannot be manufactured without materials processed in the country it's designed to deter. Cruise missiles need rare earth magnets for guidance. Laser-guided munitions need them for targeting. Submarines need them for silent propulsion. Every weapon system that distinguishes a modern military from a 1950s era military depends on rare earth elements. Now add Taiwan to this volatile mix. The shipping routes from China to Japan, South Korea, the United States, and Europe all pass through the Taiwan Strait. A blockade doesn't have to be complete to devastate supply. It just has to create enough risk that shipping insurance becomes unaffordable. Here's the timeline. Day 1, military incident in Taiwan Strait. Shipping insurers declare area high risk. Day 14, Chinese authorities announce temporary export restrictions on strategic materials. Day 30, Japanese manufacturers exhaust inventories. Production lines slow. Day 60, European wind turbine makers exhaust supplies. U.S. EV production drops to 10% of capacity. Day 90, U.S. weapons production slows. Javelin missile manufacturing drops 70%. The U.S. maintains a strategic stockpile of 500 metric tons. The Pentagon uses roughly 3,000 metric tons annually. That stockpile lasts 4 months. Here's the convergence point. The countries most dependent on Taiwanese semiconductors are also most dependent on Chinese rare earths. And both tendencies share the same geographic flashpoint. A conflict over Taiwan simultaneously cuts off advanced semiconductors and rare earth elements. Defend Taiwan and lose rare earths. Don't defend Taiwan and lose semiconductors. There's no good option. Only trade-offs between different types of vulnerability. The U.S. government finally noticed. The Department of Defense awarded $35 million to build a processing facility in California. The Inflation Reduction Act included $500 million for critical minerals. It sounds impressive until you realize building a complete supply chain from ore to finished magnet takes 15 to 20 years. The next Taiwan crisis could happen in 15 to 20 months. The mathematics don't work. Meanwhile, China keeps building. In 2023 alone, China added refining capacity equivalent to the entire non-Chinese world's total capacity. Beijing isn't defending its monopoly, it's expanding it. Here's why alternatives fail. Rare earth mining is economically viable only at scale. But achieving scale requires billions in upfront investment. And that investment only makes sense if prices stay high. But if prices stay high, China increases production and crashes the market. Every company that tried to build an alternative faced the same challenge. Invest billions in a project that becomes unprofitable the moment it succeeds. By 2030, the world needs to install 1,300 gigawatts of new wind power to meet climate targets. That requires 780,000 metric tons of rare earth magnets. China currently produces 200,000 metric tons annually, total. By 2030, EV sales reach 50 million units. That's 50,000 metric tons just for EVs. Add military needs. The Pentagon alone needs 3,000 plus metric tons annually. The world needs 300,000 metric tons annually by 2030. Current non-Chinese production, 30,000 metric tons. Even if every planned project succeeds, non-Chinese production reaches maybe 80,000 metric tons. That leaves a 220,000 metric ton gap that must be filled by China. Or the green energy transition stops, military modernization stops, or both, unless China supplies the materials. On China's terms, this is the world being built right now through environmental regulations that make rare earth refining unviable in democratic countries, through patient state investment that sustains losses American companies can't match, through quiet acquisitions across 4 continents. The question no one wants to answer: what leverage does rare earth supply give Beijing in negotiations over Taiwan? What happens when the material that powers the future becomes inseparable from geopolitical power? Every electric vehicle manufacturer that builds in China to secure supply is transferring technology. Every wind turbine company that partners with Chinese magnet producers is creating dependency. Every defense contractor that accepts Chinese rare earth supply is embedding vulnerability. The rare earth monopoly forces an impossible choice: accept dependence on China and build the green future, but embed strategic vulnerability. Or pursue independence and delay the climate transition by decades. Or find a middle path that requires China's cooperation, which means offering something Beijing wants in exchange. Technology transfer? Less aggressive rhetoric on Taiwan? No one says this out loud, but the calculations happen in classified briefings. You can't have climate action and security independence simultaneously. The countries that make painful investments in alternatives, even when economically irrational, those countries survive. The countries that optimize for efficiency, they end up negotiating from weakness when the next embargo comes. Because the next embargo will come. Maybe over Taiwan, maybe over technology controls. The trigger doesn't matter. What matters is whether, when that embargo comes, your military can produce weapons, your car companies can build EVs, your wind farms can generate power, or whether everything stops, waiting for Beijing to decide when supplies resume. This is the world being built right now, not in dramatic fashion, but through procurement decisions and regulations and patient positioning that creates dependencies others don't notice until it's too late. The rare earth war isn't coming. It's here. Most people just haven't noticed yet. If you're watching this, you understand something most don't. The materials that power the future aren't evenly distributed. The countries that control them shape the world in ways more profound than military force ever could. Subscribe to stay ahead of the stories that actually matter, because the next episode reveals something even more unsettling. Next time, the subsea cable wars. Why 99% of international data travels through undersea cables thinner than a garden hose, who controls them, and what happens when cutting them becomes cheaper than launching missiles. Because the infrastructure of the internet isn't in the cloud, it's underwater, and someone is mapping every inch of it. The silent war continues. The question is whether you're watching or just waiting.